special guest Vishvantara. She's beaming in from East London, and I'll introduce her a little bit more in a moment. My name's Jnanadhara, and I'm based here at the Dublin Buddhist Centre in the North Inner City in Dublin, and I'm going to be hosting the evening this evening and interviewing Vishvantara. So just to give you a bit of a sense of what we're going to be doing. So, well, there's going to be an interview, as you probably know from looking at the blurb. And we'll have a break after that for about 10 minutes. And there'll be an opportunity to ask questions if you have any questions after the break. And this wasn't on the bill, it wasn't on the advertising for the event, but there will be a meditation after the poetry if you want to join us for a meditation. So we'll probably finish at about 20 to 10 to 9 this evening. And like I said, there will be a break in the middle, so you can have a break from looking at the screen. So first, I want to introduce Vishvantara to you. So she's originally from Buckinghamshire in England, and she got involved with Buddhism in 1987 in London. And she was ordained into the Triratna Buddhist order in 2005. And the name she was given when she was ordained means she who carries a universe within. And she tells me that she lives in a residential community with 5 others in East London and teaches piano for a living. And she's very much involved with the life of the order and with the wider Buddhist community in Bethnal Green in East London. So Vishvantara recently visited our online Dublin Buddhist Centre, and I interviewed her about her friendship with another mutual friend, Subhadramati, and yeah, and we talked about friendship and the significance of friendship in the Buddhist life. And during that interview, she concluded with a poem that she'd written for Subhadramati for it was a significant birthday. And what I noticed was that when she read the poem, it added a whole other dimension to the conversation that we've been having. It provided a kind of deeper exploration of that theme of friendship. That different kind of voice came in, that more poetic voice. So it's a very, very beautiful poem. So it occurred to me when we were thinking about what to do for Poetry Day this year to invite Vishvantara back this time to talk explicitly about poetry, and the particular angle we're going to take I'll introduce in a moment. So Vishvantara was just actually showing me the book that she first came across, which introduced her to poetry, which was a book called The Golden Staircase, which was for children, and it included quite a sizable book, included some late Victorian and early 20th century poetry for children. And she's actually been writing poetry since she was 6. She tells me that when she was 6, she was writing rhymed and metered poetry. And she's continued to write poetry. As I say, she's a very fine poet. I'd say she's probably in the talent deserving wider recognition category. And she has won prizes. She won first prize in the Poetry London competition, and she's been commended twice in the UK Poetry Society's National Poetry Competition, and her first pamphlet, Cursive, was brought out by happenstance in 2015. So I've heard her speak about Buddhist poetry before, actually. We had a big gathering of our order a few years ago, and it may be the fact that she's a musician, but she's particularly sensitive to the sound, the rhythm, and the texture of verse. And what I've noticed about when she speaks about poetry is her sense of what's going on within the poem adds to one's understanding about what the message of the poem is. Sometimes if you analyze poetry too much, it almost takes away from the impact of it, but I find the way she talks about it enhances one's appreciation of the poetry. So yeah, so when we were thinking about what to do for Poetry Day this year, she popped into my mind. The theme for Poetry Day is New Directions, Maps and Journeys. New Directions, Maps and Journeys. And there's a long-standing tradition of poetic expression in the Buddhist East. And over the centuries, much has been written which is now available in English translation. But added to this, there's now a growing body of work written in English by Westerners who are Buddhists or have been influenced by Buddhism. So that's the kind of new direction that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at what Western poetry has, how it's been affected by Buddhist ideas and Buddhist practices. So we've now got as it were, indigenous Western Buddhist poetry, which is a new direction in the last, well, I suppose in the last 50 or so years. So that's what we're going to be exploring this evening, and we're going to hear from a number of different poets and pick up some themes and reflections along the way. We're not going to say, just to warn you, we're not going to say too much about the poets themselves. We're mainly going to focus on their poetry, but hopefully if you hear a poem or a poet that you like, you might be able to follow up afterwards. So yeah, so maybe, can we have Vishvantara on screen as well, Stephen? So I just realized you're not there yet. There we go, there she is. Welcome. Vishvantara, you wanted to start with a poem called Be Here Now by Ananda. So maybe you'd like to read the poem and then we can talk about it.
Be here now. Be here. No need to move. You are all that's needed. Leave wealth to those who have nothing else. Listen. The wind's dropped. Stars overflow just above your head. These moments have taken billions of years to grow. Don't drop them now. Here, take the key. It's all yours.
So why did you choose that one to open with, Vishvantara?
Well, I chose it because it's, to me, a beautiful example of almost a poetic instruction of mindfulness and stillness. Be here, i.e. be present, no need to move, so be still. So be present and be still. You are all that's needed. And then there's almost like a reference to something like the one of the early texts in Buddhism, which talks about how to live in order to experience love and loving kindness. And it talks about living simply with few wants. So in this poem, it talks about leave wealth to those who have nothing else, which I think is an interesting idea in itself. And listen. So again, an instruction to mindfulness. So there's lots through the poem, but the main thing that struck me was these moments have taken billions of years to grow.
Yeah, right. So what do you take from that line?
Well, from there, I take that sometimes, because there's a very central Buddhist idea of conditionality, that everything arises in dependence on conditions. And usually when we apply it to our own lives, we see a kind of cause and effect idea. But actually, conditionality embraces the macrocosm as well as the microcosm. It embraces the whole universe. And so, in a sense, these moments have taken billions of years to grow. In a sense, you could say that who we are and how we are now is kind of dependent on the Big Bang and millions of other conditions since. So it immediately engages our imagination and I think takes us out of ourselves and into another realm of feeling or thinking.
It seems that when I read that poem, what sort of, well, actually a number of the poems actually tonight, it occurred to me that, you know, the Buddhism and poetry and even art more generally, a lot of it comes down to observation, like really, really fine, keen observation. And there seems to be a lot of kind of overlap there.
Yes, I agree. I think the spareness of this, it's instruction to the reader or listener, but it's only 5 little tiny little verses of 3 lines each, very short lines. So I think it gains in intensity what it lacks in sort of fullness.
But do you think that's part of what the poem is saying is, well, you don't need anything extra than what you already have. Yes. And if you go into what you already have, then things kind of open out.
Yes.
Yes. You said, I think stars overflow just above your head.
Yes. So there's that sense of that nothing need get in the way of that imaginative leap that we can make.
Right.
Yes.
So there's observation, but also imagination.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking also, I mean, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more, is how, in a way, when one reads a poem, or any poem really, but maybe a poem like that, it sort of shifts your sensibility. It changes the way that you observe.
Yes.
I don't know if you could say something about that, how, you know, it's almost like you start looking in a different way when you hear a communication from somebody else who's looked in a different way.
Well, I think that words are magic and a form of magic, and that they convey the state of mind of the author of the words. So if a poet is writing about presence, being present, and having a sense of the vastness of conditionality in the universe, and they're writing from that sense, and we are engaged perhaps in thinking about our details of our lives at any particular moment, and the poem cuts in on that, it can actually take us into a different, completely different state of mind, almost just like that.
Yeah.
That's my own experience of hearing poetry.
Yeah. That is, I suppose that's the magical thing, isn't it? Is when
Yes.
your consciousness is transformed by your encounter with
Yes.
with the poet through the poem.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe that might segue nicely into the next poem, which is also by Ananda.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ananda was one of the first batch, as it were, of people ordained into Triratna in 1968. His name means delight in meditation. No, the bliss of meditation. And this is his poem called A Few Things Worth Remembering. And it has an epigraph from a poem by Mary Oliver, which is, there's a sickness worse than the risk of death, and that's forgetting what we should never forget. So that's the epigraph. So Ananda's poem, A Few Things Worth Remembering, that each leaf is connected to every other leaf by virtue of the tree, that very few men think they are doing harm when they do harm, that the reason there are weak and strong is so that each can help the other become more human, that even totally straight lines are part of an infinite arc, that the universe is fundamentally inscrutable, and that is our salvation, that there are things we should never forget, not ever.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, traditionally mindfulness includes memory, doesn't it?
Yes,
It's not
it
just,
does.
it's remembering where you are and what you're doing and what your purpose is, as well as having a sense of presence.
Yes, and indeed there's a third element traditionally to Buddhist mindfulness as well as those two, which is the ethical alertness against being unethical. Yeah. So that there are three. And I think that the recollection in this is this aspect of mindfulness, and also the ethical element comes in when Ananda says that very few men think they are doing harm when they do harm. As well as the sense of interconnectedness, that each leaf is connected to every other leaf by virtue of the tree. Yeah,
there's a strong, I mean, you talked a minute ago about conditionality, and that's one of, I suppose, a way into conditionality, isn't it? To see the interconnectedness between different things.
Yes, yes. And in poems, often the image stands for, if you like, the something, but there's often a feeling that something stands behind an image, that there's something that's not spelled out but is felt by the listener. And I think that, you know, that each leaf is connected to every other leaf by virtue of the tree. I hear that I'm connected to every other leaf on my tree, which is the planet, you know, that I'm connected to every other being on the planet because we share the planet. And I hear that without knowing I hear it, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there's not many images in that poem, is there? Just looking.
No, the straight lines are the strongest image. I like the idea that straight lines form an infinite arc. I can see the sort of the arc, the rainbow shape made out of straight lines. So that's the strongest one for me, but the others are all abstract. And there's, in Anderson's poetry as a whole, there's a lot more poems that do detail visual, especially visual and oral images, which I haven't chosen today. But yes, if anyone's interested in reading him, he is available to buy, and there's an awful lot of beautifully presented images of nature and art, particularly.
The poems you chose, they've got a certain sort of spareness to them.
Yes.
Like not a lot of extra material, but just very concise.
Yes.
I love that line, that the universe is fundamentally inscrutable, and that is our salvation.
Yes.
That idea of something being inscrutable, and that being somehow liberating or saving virtue is quite an interesting idea.
Yes, I think it is, and I think it points to this idea that fundamentally what Buddhists might term reality with a capital R, so how things really are in their totality as well as in their detail, how things really are is not possible to be analyzed by the mind and intellectually grasped, but experienced with something like a combination of mind and heart, or something in between that's difficult to describe.
I mean, I've been reading a book of quotes about poetry recently, and I'm reading a section which is all about, well, taking words to the edge of what they can do, and how poetry seems to kind of linger in that space where you're getting to the very edge of what words can capture or they can contain, and looking at them more in, I suppose, a kind of suggestive way.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. There's a poem by one of the other poets that I didn't choose tonight, but I was tempted to choose, which talks about the poem finishes there. Did you see it?
Oh yeah, I really like that one.
And it doesn't talk about what's there and what we're trying to see, but it means it goes beyond the words on the page. Yes.
Yeah. So that poem was by Chase Twitchell, wasn't it?
Yes.
Who's an American poet.
Yes.
And maybe you could read her poem, Zazen and Opium.
Sure. Zazen and Opium. I know what I have to give up. It's not the flashy green commotion of leaves this August evening, garden blackening, drinking, or the dogs unsettled by thunder I can't yet hear. It's not the tea kettle's ongoing quarrel with itself, or the snow's beauty coming from far away to cover the beauty now ascending. There's no sense giving up what will be taken from me anyway, first youth, now middle age departing. The eastern woodlands stricken by acid and blight, beloved sky blue blackening, cedar waxwings swooping low over the pond, feeding, fattening for their voyage to a world devoid of earth. I know what I need to know. No path lies ahead of me. Where I go, it follows. I lead it to the monastery, where I sit, steadfast in the very early hours, a pure Zen Yankee candle, my flame, a vow to save all sentient beings, beginning with myself. I also take it into the vast playgrounds of distraction, confusion, intoxication, desire, drugged by anxiety and second guesses, and deep into television's alternative wilderness. What a beautiful war I wage. The two poles, equal magnets, perfectly matched, married. My own perfect paralysis, present, then absent, then present. I inhabit the moment or do not. It's one continuous decision. The waxwings don't decide which insects to eat tonight, nor wind pause to think before clouding the mirror of the trees. They leave no monuments. Me, I'm always forsaking one place for another, breaking branches to mark my way home, taking leave of the tall grasses heavy with seed heads I crush underfoot. Birches vivid in stormlight, dogs just groomed, fearful of thunder under the desk. I smell garlic. Russell is making a marinade for the trout he'll grill beneath an umbrella. I realize, then forget, then realize that mind is an axe that splits the one continuous moment. Lightning, scared dogs, dinner, brook music. My eye goes home to the pond, the blue stone slates I laid in the low places, rain shining their way to the water.
So there's a lot more description in that one, isn't there?
Yes, and there's a lot more, and I feel that it weaves between the description around the poet, which is a sense of the mindfulness and truly being in the present, and then moving into abstraction and taking a philosophical inquiry about what's going on. So it weaves between those two modes. And funnily enough, I think it's a paradox with this poem that the poet is talking about the vast playgrounds of distraction and mentions several kinds of distraction, and talks about being present, then absent, then present. But actually one senses that the whole poem is written under the auspices of the mindfulness that the poet obviously does practice, sitting in the early hours in a monastery. And the whole poem seems to embody mindfulness, essentially, even though it talks about the opposite.
I also get a sense of, in a way, just the strangeness of consciousness, like that thing that one moment you're here and the next moment you find yourself somewhere completely different. And it's kind of, when you start noticing it, it's kind of amazing and bizarre how you can be, all of a sudden you can be somewhere different from where you were a moment ago.
Yes.
Your body's in the same place, but you've gone somewhere completely elsewhere.
Yes.
And even noticing that is part of the noticing that we're trying to cultivate, maybe.
Yes, the noticing one has been distracted is to be celebrated, in fact.
Yeah. And also noticing all the different, I mean, it's very sensuous. I smell garlic.
Yes.
Lots of sense experience that she's describing.
Yes.
How it comes and yeah. I read a little bit about Chase Twitchell, and she's apparently she's got 3 rules.
Tell me.
Tell the truth, no decoration, remember death.
Wow.
And actually, one of her other poems, she refers to those three rules. But I thought that was quite severe precepts, really.
Yes. Yes, it does sound so. I love this idea that no path lies ahead of me. So she's not following a path as we imagine in the image of following a path. The path is there to be followed. And she says, where I go, it follows. So that is my path. Where I go, she's forging her path as she lives. And at the end, what she does is, I think, beautiful. What my eye goes home to the pond, the blues stone slates I laid in the low places, rain shining their way to the water. So the path she's made to the water by laying these blue slates on the ground is shining and showing where a path she's made. And water, I think, is always sort of redolent with feeling, of the emotions almost.
Right.
So her eyes going home there. So it's one of these cases where the image speaks more than you can say about it.
Right. The way that she finishes with the image of water.
Yes, and of the path to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Having talked about another path.
Do you want to just read those last 3 lines again? Just.
My eye goes home to the pond, the blue stone slates I laid in the low places, rain shining their way to the water.
Yeah. I suppose also you can't build a path in water, literally, can you? It's, well, as soon as you're in it, it comes in around you. It doesn't leave a mark. Yeah, yeah. What about Jane Hirschfeld? Another poem, a briefer poem.
Indeed, this is called Narrowness from her book Come Thief, and it's very small. It's 5 little couplets, so 2-line verses. Narrowness. Day after day, my neighbour's cats in the garden, each in a distant spot like wary planets. One brindled grey, one black and white, one orange. They remind of the feelings, how one cannot know another completely. The way 2 cats cannot sleep in one patch of mint-scented shade.
So how do you hear what she's saying to us there?
Well, one thing I hear is about, she says, the poet herself or the poet themselves is not intruding into the poem. In the verse, they remind of the feelings. She doesn't say, they remind me of my feelings. She says, they remind the cats, these wary cats like planets, keeping apart from each other. They remind of the feelings, not my feelings. So I feel that she is saying this is a truth. This is an image of truth, not that is just applicable to her. That feelings are kept separate from each other, and that when one is up, one doesn't remember or understand what it's like to be down. When one's down, one doesn't remember or understand what it's like to be up. For example, how one cannot know another completely. And in the last verse, the way 2 cats, then she gives an image for these feelings, not being able to know each other completely. The way 2 cats cannot sleep in one patch of mint-scented shade. So they can't cuddle up together, and because they're too wary of each other. But interestingly, with words, you can't say not something without conjuring up the something. So I can't say to you, I'm not going to tell you about my dinner of lentils and rice without you being able to sort of see lentils and rice. So the fact is that she has told us that 2 cats can sleep in one patch of mint-scented shade, because we sort of conjure it up, or conjure up the picture of them being there and then trying to get away, or something of that nature. And I feel that maybe this is reading too much into it, but in Buddhist teaching, there's a state of mind called equanimity, in which one doesn't identify with either joy or pain, but the 2 are present as potentials, and one is aware of the potential of feeling any particular way, but is not actually caught up in one particular strong feeling, but is aware of all possibilities. And so to me, this poem is written from from that sort of point of view that is recognizing that different feelings can overwhelm us and catch us. We can be caught up in them, but the poem isn't caught up in them.
Yeah, thanks for that, because that sentence, I had to look at it again. They reminded the feelings. That everything else is quite straightforward, but that makes you think, what does she mean by that?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you. I feel like I understand it a wee bit better now.
I think Jane Hirschfield's poems are very, like I was saying about Arnada, but almost to if this is possible, an even greater extent, that very densely packed ideas in very short space of time. Yeah.
Is it typical of her to be quite concise in that way?
Yes, and it's my experience, yes, and more so, less so with her earliest work and more so with more later work.
Right, okay. So we move a little bit closer to home now, don't we?
Yes.
With somebody that, well, you know quite well, I know, Maitreya Bandhu.
Yes.
So do you want to read Maitreya Bandhu's poem?
I will. This is a prefatory poem to his book, The Crumb Road. And it's just called This. There's no law against my listening to this thrush behind the barn. The song's so loud it echoes like a bell. Then it's further off beyond the lawn. Whatever else there is, there's this as well. There's no law against this singing, nesting, I suppose, up in the silver birch. Even though we build a common hell, have done, and will make it worse. Whatever else there is, there's this as well.
So what do you take from that refrain?
Well, I take that the first time it refers to the thrush's song. So whatever else there is, in other words, however bad your life is, one can find beauty and be kind of, in a sense, sort of transformed by an appreciation of beauty, even if we're having a difficult time. So whatever else there is, there's this beauty. He doesn't call it beauty, but a thrush's song is very beautiful, I think. And the second time the refrain comes, it comes just after two lines that go, even though we build a common hell, have done, and will make it worse, whatever else there is, there's this as well. And the second time it comes, I hear it saying that the this refers to the common hell. And whatever else there is, the nesting, the singing, so whatever our personal okayness in the world, or however much we are surrounded by beauty, there is also the suffering of the world to consider and take into account. That is a reality as well. And I think that it's a beautiful illustration of the tension of the withdrawal from the world in order to practice our spiritual lives and engagement with the world as a response to suffering. And I think that the refrain is so beautifully done, because I think it sort of turns it on its head and calls us to consider, yes, I'm okay for now, but we have the suffering planet. So how do I deal with that experience of others' suffering? So that's what I take from the refrain.
It's wonderfully down to earth a phrase as well, isn't it? Whatever else there is this as well.
Yes.
It's the sort of thing you could say just when you're chatting to somebody.
Yes.
Which gives it a certain down to earthness.
Yes.
And it does point to something, doesn't it? About well, the more aware you become aware of everything. You can't, if you're genuinely sensitive and genuinely aware, then you will become aware that other people are not having a very good time, even though you might be having a wonderful time. And
Yeah.
it's a curious thing. It's curious to know how to respond to that.
Yes. Yes. And this one is in contrast with the others that I've read so far, this one is in rhyme and form. So the rhyme goes listening and singing, and barn and lawn, and bell and well, and hell and well, etc. So it chimes with the repetition of the line that, as you said, the repetition of whatever else there's this as well. But also it's very, very musical, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's talking about music.
Yeah. But the contrast between the word bell and the word hell,
yes,
could hardly be more stark, could it?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the next poem, also by Jane Hirschfeld, is also about the world in that kind of way, isn't it? Or...
Yes, I think very much so. Very, very much so, I think. Although, as we talked about recently, it's also very hard sometimes to say what a poem is actually about, isn't it? It's how it makes us feel, I suppose, that it's or think, that's the interesting part. This poem makes me feel sad and kind of thoughtful in a sort of slightly sober and serious way. But anyway, see what you think. It's got an unpronounceable title, and it's an Anglo-Saxon or Old English title from Beowulf, the Old English epic poem from the 7th century. And the words are Herfon Reke Swelg. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing that in anything like I should, but it roughly
translates. I happen to know there's 2 Anglo-Saxon scholars in the audience. Just don't, you're all right. You're all right. You're doing okay.
Thank you. Okay, Herfon Reke Swelg. Batteries, yellow trucks hauling garbage, ampicillin, napalm. These two will be replaced by the not yet imagined. The engines of diesel will silence, joining the engines of steam, the brayings of mule. And still, the poetry of ancient Sumeria will be understood with ease. Humiliation, ambition, slaughter, the cutting down of the tallest cedar. And Beowulf's verdict, yet hold. Technologies alter, heaven swallows the smoke.
Yeah, I've read that poem, and hearing it is quite different, actually. Because there's some quite horrifying words in there. Napalm, for example.
Yes.
Slaughter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that Heaven Swallows the Smoke? Is that what the title refers to?
Yes. The title is Herr von Recke Swelg in inverted commas because it's a quotation from Beowulf. And Beowulf's verdict, yet hold, there's a little colon there. Technologies alter, and Heaven Swallows the Smoke is in italics to indicate that it is the translation of the title. So she's given that the title.
She's given a clue.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And what does it suggest for you, that poem? What does it? You said it makes you thoughtful in a sober kind of way. What thoughts occur to you, or what?
Well, for me, it's again a sort of a view of the planet that sort of leapt out into battery. These are sort of seemingly random batteries, trucks hauling garbage, ampicillin, napalm. you know, and seemingly random list of things. And then it says, these will be replaced by the not yet imagined. So immediately my mind's gone on to trying to imagine what maybe what will evolve, you know, what will replace batteries as our power source, what will replace garbage, you know, what will replace ampicillin, what could possibly replace this terrible weapon. And then it says the engines of diesel will silence. So this is in the idea of things evolving and changing, the universe, the planet evolving and changing. The engines of diesel will silence, joining the engines of steam and the brayings of mule. And to me, there's a rather chilling sort of subtext there, which is not just that the mule carried the load before the steam train did, but also that creatures are, you know, undergoing mass extinction. So the silence is also the creatures of the planet there. The brayings of mule are silenced.
That's the first creature that's mentioned, isn't it?
Yes, it
Everything
is.
else is either a machine or a chemical or a
yes. Yes. And still the poetry of ancient Sumeria will be understood with ease. So the poetry of ancient Sumeria was from 2000 odd years BC. And I did look it up, some Sumerian poetry, and found it remarkably understandable, like remarkably fresh, really, in the translations I read. So she quotes humiliation, ambition, slaughter, the cutting down of the tallest cedar. These are things that have been going on since time immemorial, thousands and thousands of years since humanity. These are mental states, humiliation, ambition. These are actions, slaughter, cutting down trees. So we can understand the poetry because we're still doing these things. And there's a teaching in Buddhism that the world of greed, hatred, and ignorance is endless. The endless round is the phrase of the wheel of life. That is, the hub of the wheel is driven by these three poisons. And it whilst the three poisons are in us, to whatever extent, the wheel will continue to turn. So she is, I think, trying to map that onto the current awareness of how we are affecting the planet, or how humanity is affecting the planet. And Beowulf's verdict yet hold technology, so the technology may alter. So how they cut down trees now is different from then, but whatever is happening with the technology, heaven is swallowing the smoke of it. So we are affecting the whole atmosphere of the planet. But I mean, it's only my own reading of it. There could be multiple readings of it.
Sure. And when you hear heaven swallows the smoke, does that suggest to you that heaven is being poisoned by the smoke, or that heaven can somehow absorb the smoke? Or because
yes, I've seen alternative translations of I've seen in other translations of the Beowulf, heaven or the sky or heaven sips the smoke. So I think that her very careful use of the word swallows is ambiguous, actually. I don't know that she doesn't use a word like it's not poisoned. She hasn't said heaven is poisoned by the smoke deliberately, I think, so that it's up to us to make our own associations, I think.
Yeah. So she's been deliberately ambiguous about what the effect on heaven is of the smoke.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The fact there's even heaven in there at all is significant, presumably, that there isn't just the world, there's heaven as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes you reach the end of what you can say.
Yes. Well, it's such a powerful, punching poem, I think. So it, yeah.
The next one's a little bit more.
It's a very great contrast, because this is a beautiful, soft. Sorry, I shouldn't say too much about it, should I? It's a contrast. This is by Paula Meehan, and it's called The Recipe. She believed it would strengthen the blood, the soup my grandmother Mary made. Nettle, onion, parsley, thyme, and spud. Each spring, when the nettle tips appeared in clumps, the rough end of the backyard, I, a willing and complicit ward, dogged her footsteps, thus to learn the hard way what a nettle was, to learn that good comes sleeved in pain, had best be suffered.
The nettles are out at the moment, just at the moment when you can pick them and make soup out of them. I haven't been game, but I've seen them about this high in the waste ground by the canal, etc.
Yes. Yes. And it's a poem of 3 verses of 3 lines each, and they are rhymed. Blood and spud, yard and ward and hard, good and suffered. You know, that they do gently rhyme. You may not have noticed it because they're not clanging rhymes. You know, they're quite soft rhymes. And a beautiful poem of reminiscence from childhood, I feel. And it's like you're drawn into the description of the ingredients of the soup and the young child in the spring when the nettle tips appeared in clumps. The young child, the willing and complicit ward, dogging the grandmother's footsteps, so following her grandmother around and trying to copy her, and then learning the hard way what a nettle was. And then this beautiful sort of little teaching she draws out of that, as though her mind just goes from the memory, as though it sort of suddenly sort of unfolds into this, to learn that good comes sleeved in pain. And it reminds me that, Paula Meehan was influenced by Buddhism, and that there's another poem of hers that we may hear later on that talks about it more explicitly. But good coming sleeved in pain reminds me of, there's a teaching that in Buddhism that if one becomes aware of one's unsatisfactory experience or suffering or pain or hardship or any discomfort, and stays with that experience rather than trying to jump off and fix it, one can actually experience states of mind that follow on from that arise out of that, staying with the experience, that are much more pleasurable. That sort of one thing, it's a positive action to stay with the experience, and out of that positive action of staying with the experience comes a greater positivity. So this teaching of the spiral path, the positive spiral, strikes me that could be something that perhaps implied by this. I don't know if the poet did imply that directly, but certainly I think is part of Buddhist teaching that that's a good thing to do.
It's a lovely little poem where, I mean, it reminds me of a lot of Seamus Heaney's poems where there's a very strong evocation of a memory, and then something's kind of distilled from the memory something that's true, or something that's about all experience, or about life in general.
Yeah.
It's just a lovely, it really draws you in, doesn't it?
Yes.
Although, well, it's very, again, a very sensuous: nettles, onion, parsley, thyme, and spud. And well, I suppose nettles. When you hear nettle, you feel the stinging sensation on your hand. It suggests that stinging.
Yes.
Without telling you about that until you get to the end, when it uses the word pain, doesn't it?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and I suppose, the soup is presumably the good thing that comes from the
Exactly.
nettles.
It's very, very down to earth
Yeah.
poem. Yes.
So, it's just basic human nutrition, I suppose.
Yes. Yes.
Um, yeah. And then another one by Maitreya Bandhu.
Yes. So this is from a longer poem. It's an extract, short section from a longer poem called "The Travellers from Orissa," and it's a recounting of a meeting between two early people who met the Buddha, men who met the Buddha. I think it might even have been one of them, the one of his first meetings after he became enlightened. Seem to remember that. And
I think you're right about that. It's one of the very few people that he encounters.
yes, I think so. And this is a fictional account by Maitreya Bandhu of the experience of one of those men called Balika. And Tapusa was the other man. So I'm going to read from the sort of towards the end of the poem, but not the very end. Everything was true about the place, I said, the forest grove, the food I went and fetched. But after we had eaten, and Tapusa had gone through all his questions once again, and hardly listened, and had no more to say, the master said, I remember every word. I've kept them with me all this time. He said, listen, my friends. There is a thorn buried in the heart of man, and for this thorn they suffer here and now and in the future. I have found that thorn and plucked it out, and for me the mass of suffering is no more. Tapusa jumped in, saying, yes, but, I could have struck him and quickly said his name. But the Lord, for so he seemed to me just then, looked at him with such a heart of love I couldn't speak. And then a wonder came and troubled me and worked within my soul, as if I'd rise and shout and stamp my feet. But then I saw Kurangi's face, the boys, the village fields I'd always known. How could I leave and walk the triple world with him? My heart was like a netted fish thrown up upon a dusty bank and thrashing wildly. But the master, the happily attained, guide unsurpassed of men to be tamed, the blessed one, richly endowed, he seemed to search inside my heart and urge it forward. I didn't follow the blessed one that day. I left with Tapusa, as I said, and walked back into my life and tried to take it up, the way I'd always lived. Only Kurangi knew that something deep inside had changed. And soon I found how little I could say. And soon I gave up trying, even with her. Tapusa hadn't understood. He'd turned the whole thing upside down and made it all about himself and how he stood and what he had to say. I'd kept a stubborn silence. And though I've loved my children, one and all, Nagia best, perhaps, and though my life's been blessed, I won't complain. I knew as I climbed inside the cart, the sky still bright above my head, and half the journey done, I knew that day that I'd betrayed my life.
Wow. So that, we go right into, this is a Buddhist poem about the Buddha.
Yes.
So there's no messing about.
No.
And why do you think he betrayed his life? And that's a question that I've often been left with reading that poem.
Yes, I think because he says, a wonder came and troubled me and worked within my soul as if I'd rise and shout and stamp my feet. When he hears the message of the Buddha, that the Buddha has plucked out this thorn that's in everybody's heart, and he probably recognized it in himself. Somebody has plucked it out. He wanted to pluck it out himself and follow the teacher who could teach him how to do that. But he had a wife, he saw Karangi's face, his children. How could he leave? My heart was like a netted fish thrown up upon a dusty bank and thrashing wildly. And the master seemed to search inside my heart and urge it forward. So the master was calling him, he felt. So it was a natural thing that the urge to follow this man was totally natural in him. It's an intuitive understanding of what he could experience if he left to follow, but he was held back by his worldly duties and responsibilities. And
do you think the impact of the poem is partly because we feel that conflict maybe ourselves, between the freedom that we could have and also the attachment we have to things being as they are right now and that being comfortable?
I really think so.
Yeah.
I really think so. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that poem is an iambic pentameter, isn't it?
It is. It's in what's called blank verse, which means unrhymed. It's used for narratives, like Wordsworth's Prelude, and which is an autobiography in verse. And so this is narrative, and so blank verse is ideal, very skillfully done. You can hear it if you compare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day, which is also iambic pentameter? I knew that day that I betrayed my life. There's the iambic pentameter.
But I suppose the reason that that's interesting to me is that it's such a Western form.
Yes.
What's being spoken about is the Buddha, something from the East.
Yes.
But being spoke, it's like I don't know what the word is, kind of an indigenous Western form, particularly within English poetry, and so much of the great English poetry is written in that form, and yet Maestro Bandu is talking about something which is from a different place in that kind of way, which makes it sort of doubly striking or something.
Yes.
It's got a kind of a punchiness to it, or
yeah, it has.
There's a lot more that could be said about that.
Yes.
Maybe on another occasion.
On another occasion.
Just, that whole area of, something, something coming in that's new from both, something new coming into the West and the West bringing something new to what's coming from the East, as it were, in terms of forms and aesthetics, because we do have such a well-developed aesthetic culture in Western art and music and poetry, etc.
Yes.
So we're coming towards the end now. Now, we spoke about this thing that in a way you get to the point where the more you talk about a poem, the more it almost like you can spoil it with talking about it too much. Maybe hopefully we haven't crossed that line. But we thought we'd finish this first part with actually just a poem.
Without any talking.
Without any talking. And it is a sonnet, which is such again, an iconic form, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it is.
So maybe we'll finish this part with this poem, which I'll let you.
Thank you. The sonnet is called Liminal by Paula Meehan. I've always loved thresholds, the stepping over, the shape changing, that can happen when you jump off the edge into pure breath, and then the passage between inner and outer. Mist becomes cloud, becomes rain, water, ice, water. In the daily flux, no telling where one will end or begin. Death can kickstart and birth be the true elfin. You jig and you reel through molecular spin, daughter. Nothing can harm you or cure you. You've found a clear path through the chaos, a loaning from history. And whether you are free or bound is still in the balance. There's no gain in owning. Old riddles still posit the same. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Is that the door opening or closing?
Great, thanks so much, Vishvantara. Yeah, it's been lovely actually, just hearing you read actually, but also just hearing how one can listen and sort of delve more deeply into what a poem is and what it does. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your knowledge and your love actually of poems. It's been a real privilege.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Jnanadhara. I really,
You know,
really
you're more
enjoyed
than
it.
welcome. Yeah.